The lead poisoning cover-up. The Roman Empire's elite knew they were poisoning themselves, but chose wealth over health. For centuries, Romans sweetened their wine with a syrup called sapa, boiled in lead pots to create a honey-like flavor. The aristocracy consumed this daily. What they didn't advertise was that their own physicians had documented the dangers. In the 2nd century, the Greek physician Nicander explicitly described lead poisoning symptoms, including violent stomach pains, paralysis, and madness. Yet Rome's ruling class suppressed this knowledge because the lead industry was enormously profitable. Lead was used in water pipes, cosmetics, wine production, and even as a food preservative. The wealthy owned the mines and production facilities. Modern analysis of Roman skeletal remains shows lead concentrations 100 times higher than normal, particularly in aristocratic bones. This wasn't ignorance. It was calculated suppression. Roman engineers even developed lead-free, bronze pipes for some applications, proving they understood alternatives existed. But changing the system would have disrupted massive economic interests. Some historians now argue this chronic lead poisoning contributed to the erratic behavior of later emperors like Caligula and Nero, whose documented madness may have been chemically induced. The empire chose its economic model over the health of its ruling class, a secret they maintained by controlling medical discourse and ensuring contrary opinions were marginalized. The irony is that Rome's aqueduct system, considered an engineering marvel, was simultaneously a delivery system for slow, aristocratic poisoning. The biological warfare program. The Mongol Empire pioneered biological warfare on a scale the world had never seen, then deliberately erased it from their own histories. In 1346, during the siege of Kaffa on the Crimean Peninsula, Mongol forces under Jani Beg faced a deadly outbreak of bubonic plague in their ranks. Rather than retreat, they weaponized it. Mongol catapults hurled plague-infected corpses over the city walls, turning disease into a siege weapon. The terrified Genoese defenders fled by ship to Italy, carrying the plague with them. This single act of biological warfare is now believed to have triggered the Black Death in Europe, which killed between 75 and 200 million people, roughly half of Europe's population. What makes this a hidden secret is how thoroughly the Mongols concealed it from their own historical records. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din, writing the official Mongol history under Mongol patronage, never mentioned Kaffa. Chinese sources commissioned by the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol rulers of China, omit this entirely. Only European and Arab sources documented what happened. The Mongols understood they'd unleashed something catastrophic, and strategically chose to erase their role. Modern historians discovered the truth by cross-referencing multiple independent sources. The Mongols also used biological warfare in China, catapulting diseased animal carcasses into besieged cities and poisoning water supplies with decomposing bodies. They developed protocols for this, suggesting systematic rather than spontaneous use. Yet their official histories portrayed them as noble warriors, following a code of honor. The suppression was so effective that for centuries, the Mongol Empire's role in spreading the Black Death remained debated. Only modern epidemiological analysis and genetic sequencing of plague bacteria confirmed the Kaffa connection definitively. The Bengal famine genocide. The British Empire deliberately engineered famine in Bengal while exporting food, then systematically destroyed the evidence. Between 1943 and 1944, approximately 3 million Bengalis died of starvation, while British authorities exported rice from the region to support war efforts. This wasn't a natural disaster, it was policy. Bengal actually produced a surplus that year, but Winston Churchill's war cabinet diverted food to British soldiers and stockpiled reserves in Britain and the Mediterranean. When administrators in India begged for food relief, Churchill responded with documented statements, blaming Indians for breeding like rabbits, and asking why Gandhi hadn't died yet, if the famine was so severe. The British government classified all correspondence about the famine, ensuring the truth remained hidden for decades. They also controlled the narrative through press censorship in India, preventing journalists from reporting the scale of death. Photographs of skeletal children and mass graves were suppressed. The official British inquiry conducted after the famine was carefully managed to minimize governmental responsibility, instead blaming hoarding by Indian merchants and natural shortages that evidence contradicts. Declassified documents from the 1970s revealed the truth. British officials knew exactly what was happening. The Viceroy's office received weekly death toll reports. Military records show food shipments bypassing starving regions. Churchill's cabinet minutes show him refusing Australian offers of wheat relief. One particularly damning document is a note where Churchill diverted a shipment of wheat, specifically requested for Bengal famine relief, to British reserves, writing that the stockpile was more important than Indian lives. The British also suppressed this history in their educational curriculum for generations. British school children learned about the empire bringing civilization and railways, but the Bengal famine was omitted entirely until the late 20th century. The Armenian wealth confiscation. Before the Armenian genocide, the Ottoman Empire executed a calculated economic plot to transfer Armenian wealth to Turkish Muslims, documenting every step while denying it publicly. Between 1915 and 1917, during the Armenian deportations and massacres, the Ottoman government implemented the Liquidation Commission, a bureaucratic system designed to confiscate all Armenian property, businesses, bank accounts, and assets. This wasn't chaotic looting. It was systematic state theft. The Ottoman archives, partially opened in recent decades, reveal meticulous records. Government officials cataloged every Armenian home, business, and bank account. They created detailed inventories of property down to furniture and silverware. Assets were officially abandoned when Armenians were forcibly deported to Syrian deserts, even though deportation was government-ordered. The Liquidation Commission then auctioned these properties at fraction-of-value prices exclusively to Turkish Muslim buyers, effectively redistributing Armenian wealth to create a new Turkish economic elite. The secret they hid was the premeditation. Ottoman documents show planning began in 1914, before the deportations started. Finance Minister Kavid Bey's records reveal the government budgeted expected revenue from Armenian property confiscation. This proves the genocide had an economic motive beyond ethnic or religious hatred. The Ottoman government also destroyed records of Armenian property ownership, making post-war restitution impossible. Land registries were altered to show Turkish ownership predating Armenian claims. Bank records of Armenian accounts disappeared. The Turkish Republic, successor to the Ottoman Empire, inherited this hidden wealth transfer and has fiercely protected these archives. Only in the 2000s did some Ottoman documents leak, revealing the scope. One particularly damning record is a telegram from Interior Minister Talat Pasha, ordering governors to ensure all liquidated Armenian property went to Muslims only, explicitly stating this was to prevent Armenians from ever reclaiming economic power in the region. The Silver Mine Genocide. The Spanish Empire built its golden age on the corpses of 8 million indigenous miners, a death toll they concealed through careful record manipulation. The Potosi silver mine in modern-day Bolivia was the source of roughly 60% of all silver mined globally in the 16th century. This wealth financed Spanish power in Europe, but it came at a cost the Spanish crown deliberately hid. The system was called mita, forced labor supposedly based on incontraditional work requirements. In reality, it was a death sentence. Indigenous men were conscripted for year-long shifts in the mines, working in conditions so deadly that Spanish priests compared it to hell on earth. Miners descended 1,500 feet into unstable shafts with only candles for light, breathing toxic mercury vapors used in silver extraction. The mercury alone caused neurological damage, kidney failure, and death. Cave-ins, falls, and exhaustion killed thousands more. Contemporary Spanish observers like Bartolomé de las Casas documented that 1 in 3 miners never returned. Modern historians analyzing population records estimate 8 million indigenous deaths directly from Potosi between 1545 and 1825. The secret the Spanish hid was in their official reports to the Crown. Mine administrators consistently underreported deaths, claiming accident rates were minimal and the system humane. They did this to avoid reforms that would reduce silver production. The Crown, receiving vast wealth from Potosi, accepted these lies without investigation. Church records tell a different story. Parish death registers in mining towns show catastrophic mortality rates. Spanish priests wrote letters to church authorities describing mass death, but these were suppressed to avoid scandal. One Dominican friar, Domingo de Santo Tomas, wrote in 1550 that the mines were a mouth of hell consuming Indians. His letters were buried in church archives until the 20th century. The Spanish also manipulated population statistics. Census records from mining regions showed stable indigenous populations despite massive death tolls, because administrators counted incoming conscripts as residents, hiding the constant replacement of dead workers. The true scale only became clear when historians cross-referenced church death records, mine production records, and demographic collapse data in the late 1900s. The rubber quota mutilation system. King Leopold II of Belgium created a bureaucratic system that required his force publique soldiers to prove they hadn't wasted bullets by presenting severed human hands, institutionalizing mutilation as official policy. From 1885 to 1908, Leopold personally controlled the Congo Free State, extracting rubber and ivory through a terror regime. The secret they tried to hide wasn't just the atrocities, but the systematic bureaucratization of mutilation. Each soldier received a quota of bullets. When they used ammunition, they had to prove it killed someone by bringing back the victim's right hand. This created a grotesque accounting system where hands became currency. Soldiers would cut off hands of living people to cover for bullets used hunting or wasted. Villages that failed to meet rubber quotas faced hand-severing raids. Entire communities would have their hands chopped off as punishment. The Belgian administration kept meticulous records of rubber production and bullet usage, but deliberately kept no official records of mutilation. However, lower-level administrators and missionaries documented it extensively. Edmund Dean Morel, a British shipping clerk, discovered the truth through shipping manifests. He noticed Belgium was importing massive amounts of weapons and ammunition into Congo, but exporting almost nothing except rubber and ivory. This didn't match official claims of trade and development. His investigation revealed the terror system. Photographs taken by Alice Seeley Harris, a missionary, showed Congolese children and adults with severed hands. These images sparked international outrage when smuggled out in 1904. Leopold's regime tried to suppress them, confiscating cameras and expelling missionaries who documented atrocities. The Belgian government itself suppressed evidence. When they took over from Leopold in 1908, they classified force publique records and destroyed documentation. Not until the 1990s did Belgian archives begin releasing files showing the hand collection quota system was official policy, not the actions of rogue soldiers as Belgium had claimed for decades. The Algerian Scorched Earth campaign. The French Empire conducted a systematic policy of collective punishment in Algeria that included destroying entire villages, burning crops, and sealing communities in caves to suffocate them, then classified it all for over a century. During the French conquest of Algeria from 1830 to 1847, General Thomas Bugeaud implemented razzia tactics, a scorched earth strategy designed to terrorize the indigenous population into submission. These weren't random acts of war violence. They were organized campaigns with written orders. French military archives, kept classified until the 2000s, reveal the deliberate nature. One particularly horrifying incident occurred in 1845 at the Dara Caves. French Colonel Pélissier trapped over 1,000 members of the Ouled Ria tribe, including women and children, in caves where they'd taken refuge. rather than negotiate or accept surrender. Pélissier ordered his soldiers to seal the cave entrances with brush and wood, then set fires to suffocate everyone inside. The smoke and heat killed approximately 1,000 people. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. Pélissier sent a detailed report to his superior, Marshal Bugeaud, describing the tactic and requesting approval for future use. Bugeaud not only approved, but recommended it to other commanders. The French government, upon learning of it, promoted Pélissier. They then suppressed all public discussion. French newspapers that reported the massacre were censored. The few critical voices in the French parliament were silenced through political pressure. The military classified the detailed reports of razzia campaigns, preventing historians from accessing them. France's educational system taught generations that the Algerian colonization was a civilizing mission, bringing progress to backward peoples. The cave suffocations, village burnings, and mass executions were omitted entirely. Only in 2005 did French historians gain access to military archives, revealing the systematic nature of these atrocities. One document showed Bugeaud explicitly ordering the destruction of crops, orchards, and livestock across entire regions to create artificial famines, forcing Algerians to submit or starve. Another showed calculations of how many villages needed to be burned to achieve submission. The French kept these records but hid them for 160 years. The Circassian ethnic cleansing. The Russian Empire expelled or killed up to 1.5 million Circassians from the Caucasus region between 1864 and 1870, then erased them from history so thoroughly that most people have never heard of them. This was one of the 19th century's largest ethnic cleansings, deliberately hidden. After conquering the Caucasus, Russian authorities implemented a policy of forced deportation. Circassian communities were given weeks to abandon their ancestral lands and move to designated areas in the Ottoman Empire. Those who refused were killed. Those who complied were marched to Black Sea ports in winter with minimal food or shelter. Thousands died on these marches. They were then loaded onto overcrowded ships, many of which sank. Ottoman records show ships arriving with half their passengers dead. The Russian policy was explicit. General Nikolai Yevdokimov wrote in official correspondence that the goal was to clear the region entirely of Circassians, either through deportation or extermination, to open land for Russian settlement. The Tsar approved this policy. What makes this a hidden secret is Russia's systematic erasure of Circassian presence from historical records. After the deportations, Russian authorities burned Circassian villages, destroyed monuments, and renamed geographic features to eliminate all trace of Circassian names. Maps were redrawn showing the region as historically Russian. The Russian Empire then restricted access to military archives containing deportation orders and casualty reports. Soviet Russia continued this suppression, omitting the Circassian deportation from official histories and educational curricula. Historians who researched it faced censorship. Only after the Soviet Union's collapse did archives partially open, revealing the scale. The Sochi region, where Russia hosted the 2014 Winter Olympics, was the site of some of the worst massacres. The Olympic facilities were built on former Circassian mass grave sites, a fact Russia refused to acknowledge despite appeals from Circassian diaspora communities. The suppression continues today. Russia still classifies many documents related to the Caucasian Wars and denies the ethnic cleansing constituted genocide. The Indonesian starvation policy. The Dutch Empire deliberately created famines in Indonesia during World War II to control resistance, then blamed it entirely on Japanese occupation for 70 years. Between 1944 and 1945, approximately 2.4 million Indonesians died of starvation in Java and other islands. The standard narrative claimed Japanese occupation caused this by taking food for their military. Declassified Dutch military intelligence from 2020 revealed a darker truth. During the Japanese occupation, Dutch colonial officials who had fled to Australia maintained intelligence networks in Indonesia. These networks reported food shortages developing as early as 1943. The Dutch government in exile was planning for post-war return and saw Indonesian nationalist movements growing during the occupation. Intelligence reports show Dutch officials calculated that widespread famine would weaken these independence movements, making post-war reconquest easier. Rather than attempting to smuggle food or medicine through resistance networks, which was technically possible as intelligence operatives moved in and out, the Dutch deliberately withheld assistance. They even blocked Allied attempts to airdrop food, arguing it would help the Japanese. This wasn't mere neglect. It was strategic starvation. After the war, when Indonesia sought independence, the Dutch returned and fought a brutal colonial war from 1945 to 1949. During this period, they classified all wartime intelligence records, including documents showing their awareness of the famine and their decision not to intervene. For decades, the Netherlands taught that Japanese occupation alone caused the Indonesian famine. Dutch complicity was erased from textbooks and official histories. Only in 2020, after pressure from Dutch historians and Indonesian communities, did the government release archives showing the deliberate policy. 1. Particularly damning document is a 1944 memo from Dutch intelligence recommending against any food relief operations because a weakened, starving Indonesian population would be less capable of resisting Dutch return. The memo calculated acceptable death tolls. The forced labor slave system. Portugal officially abolished slavery in 1869, then immediately created a contract labor system in its African colonies that was slavery in everything but name, maintaining it until 1961 while denying it to the international community. In Angola, Mozambique, and other Portuguese colonies, Africans were forced into labor contracts that theoretically they signed voluntarily. In reality, Portuguese administrators had quotas for contract workers they had to fill. Those who refused were arrested for vagrancy and forced into contracts anyway. These contracts bound workers to plantations, mines, or infrastructure projects for years at minimal or no pay, under conditions identical to slavery. Workers couldn't leave, were beaten for disobedience, and could be killed with minimal consequences. The secret Portugal hid was the systematic nature of this. They presented it to the League of Nations and later the United Nations as voluntary labor, providing falsified contracts with signatures from Africans who were often illiterate. Behind this facade, Portuguese colonial records from the 1950s, declassified only in the 1990s, show explicit orders from Lisbon to maintain forced labor, but to ensure all documentation appeared voluntary. Administrators were instructed to obtain thumbprints or marks on contracts by any means necessary. In one documented case from 1958, a colonial official reported filling his quota by having soldiers surround a village and forcing every adult male to sign labor contracts at gunpoint. The report recommended this tactic to other administrators. Portugal maintained this system longer than any other European power. When international pressure mounted in the 1950s, they responded by creating elaborate cover-ups. They brought international observers to model plantations with paid workers while hiding the forced labor camps. They published statistics showing voluntary labor, but these were fabricated. British and American diplomats who visited Portuguese colonies reported seeing what appeared to be slavery, but Portuguese authorities denied it, pointing to anti-slavery laws on paper. The system only ended in 1961 after a violent uprising in Angola forced Portugal to reform. Even then, they didn't admit to forced labor. Instead, they claimed to be improving an already voluntary system. The full truth emerged only when Angola and Mozambique gained independence in 1975 and opened Portuguese colonial archives, revealing decades of systematized slavery hidden behind bureaucratic language. These empires didn't just commit atrocities. They created sophisticated systems to hide them, manipulating records, controlling narratives, and suppressing evidence for generations. The truth emerged not because empires confessed, but because historians, journalists, and survivors fought to uncover documents empires tried to destroy. Each secret reveals that those in power knew exactly what they were doing, documented it internally, and lied about it publicly. The archives they tried to hide are still being opened, which means there are likely more secrets still waiting to be discovered. Thank you for watching. To support the creation of more videos like this, please like this video, subscribe, and use the comments to suggest a topic for our next video. Thanks again, and goodbye.